Greetings, Mark Garang here, publisher of the Conway Daily Sun. And my guests today are Amy Frechette, school superintendent, Ryan Wallace, who's the acting school board chair for another week, and then Mike DeGrigorio, who is a school board member and has been past school board chair, right? So welcome all.
Currently vice chair.
Currently vice chair, okay. So we got a lot to cover, but Amy, you've been superintendent obviously for whatever, 8 or 9 months now. What has surprised you about the new job and what hasn't surprised you?
Well, I think having spent most of my professional career here in the Mount Washington Valley, I had a solid understanding of what the job entailed. There have been some additional projects and challenges that have come up, things like tuition renegotiations that happen once every 20 years, things of that nature that you can't really prepare for because even previous people in my position hadn't been a part of that. So just navigating all of that as I go, but not many surprises, pretty much knew what to expect and just tried to tackle everything head on with forward-thinking, solution-focused mindset.
Yeah, and I think that's what the community is looking for you to do, and you've done that, and I think that's been appreciated.
Thank you.
Certainly been in we're in an interesting time with education and the school system. It's easy to, because the school budget is so complicated and all that, I think that, unfortunately, the discussion about school systems really comes down to a budget, right? Whether you support it or not, and that's sort of where people tend to get pigeonholed or whether they support the school system unfairly or not. But how can you, all of you, and maybe Mike start since you're closest to me, is that how do you convince the average voter to support your budget? Not in terms of going through each individual line item, but in terms of like a vision and where the school system is now. Is it what condition you think the school system is in now, and what do you see ahead?
So I guess I would start off with this year's budget and what the reasons for the increase, right? So we know that special ed was a huge factor. Almost all of that's out of our control. Some of it was increase in where we have to put kids in out-of-district positions, but all of it's mandated by law. The other big portion of it was the contracts with the unions. All of those, the two that are currently in the budget, were approved by the voters in last year's budget. And then insurance. Insurance, I think we got a maximum ability up to 8%, right, for insurance increase, right? So that's a portion of that we really didn't have a lot of control over. What we do have control over is where we try to go in the future. And I think that's where Amy's vision has really started to come in already, where we're putting things in place to really start to look at that report card that we see nationally, not just here in Conway, but nationally. We've hired a curriculum coordinator at the SAU 9 level, which increases Conway's level because we pay into the SAU 9. But the entire SAU 9 is really doing an evaluation as to how to increase that report card. So when you ask me, about people supporting our budget, there are things in there that we don't have a lot of control over, but the things that we do have control over, we need the support to make that happen. Everybody in this town, including our friend Bill Marvel, who writes about the students all the time, wants us to increase that report card, make that education better, and that's what we're trying to work on.
And Amy, can you speak to the what the priorities are for the future, but not in terms of budget, but just in terms of a vision, I guess?
Sure. So we know we need to focus on teacher professional development and on curriculum and instruction. Those efforts, as Mike mentioned, have already begun. So the Director of Curriculum and Instruction is coaching teachers, is providing embedded professional development for our teachers that all not only supports overall student achievement long-term and improving student achievement and student outcomes, but it also helps to support the retention of high quality teachers. We're facing a staffing shortage across the nation, fewer people going into education, especially in math and science and special education. And so we really need to make every effort we possibly can to retain the people that we have and to recruit really highly qualified people. And one way to do that is to make sure they're supported and that they have the professional development that they need to continue to grow and improve their own practice. So that's one major priority moving forward.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to, Ryan, in terms of like teacher development and retention, how much is that is, and Amy too, but how much is that is about paying them enough so they stay here and be attracted, and how much is that is actually teacher performance, I guess, for lack of a better word?
Well, I think pay is a massive thing that we're facing as far as, and we tried to address over the past 2 contracts, increasing the teacher wage, getting it better on the scale. I think going forward for the next teacher contract, and I think Randy Davidson talks about this all the time, is removing some of the steps so that we can condense that. But I think we're pretty close to the median average. But the cost, and this is like probably a bigger issue that teachers face, is the cost of education that they are incurring to become teachers is creating further problems like in the housing market for what they can afford. So they're gonna chase those higher salaries because they're coming out of college with so much debt themselves that money's gonna talk, and if we have to pay them more to compete. I don't know if that's
Amy, has it changed any in terms of the ability to attract teachers in the last year or so? I mean, we all are faced with we all know about and employers are faced with the housing shortage, and that's a big part of employee retention. So is there anything changed, have you seen or noticed?
We've changed, or at least improved upon, a lot of our recruiting practices. So casting a wider net, engaging in job fairs and virtual job fairs, those types of things to try to recruit people. But as Ryan said, pay and benefits, salaries and benefits is one component. Sometimes there's less flexibility there, just as far as approving a budget or getting a contract approved. But there's also, our school climate and culture, that if we create places where people want to work, because they feel supported and because the climate is positive and engaging and motivating and inspiring for them, not as much emphasis needs to be placed on teacher salary. I think we need to increase it to still remain competitive, but I do think that there's other things we can do to make people want to come work for us. We live in a beautiful area with a lot to offer, but as Ryan said, our biggest challenge is the housing market. I think I mentioned at a previous interview or conversation or budget committee meeting or something that last summer I had more second interviews with potential employees, meaning like they were ready to go to the school board for approval, and in between that second interview with me and the time they were being approved by the board, they had to pull their name out of the running because they just simply couldn't find a place to live. So while we can increase the teacher salary, we also need to, as a community, address the housing crisis. And it's a crisis for everyone, as you mentioned, and we all have ownership in that.
I'm going to go back to the budget, but since you talked about the housing thing, this is jumping around a little bit, but way jumping around. But Mike, you had proposed an idea of John Fuller of a special ed center, lack of a better word. Is there any obligation for the school to provide housing? I mean, employers are starting to think and basically buying apartment buildings for housing for their employees. What about I just thought of this, it's off the top of my head, like all ideas, they're pretty easy to come by. What about turning John Fuller into an apartment complex?
I think that has been part of the conversation, and it's part of the conversation we're still talking about. I think the bigger question is whether government would be doing that as opposed to a private entity. So certainly if a developer does it, they're only, their apartment rates are going to be something that they make money at.
Right.
You know, I mean, I had someone say to me that we, the school, should renovate that building into an apartment building and charge the teachers like $500
Yeah,
a
okay,
month, right?
yeah.
That would be almost ridiculous for us to do, right? We
Right.
just couldn't afford something like that. One of the things we did do to help with retention and getting people is now if a staff member lives, let's say in Ossipee or wherever, Freiburg, Maine, wherever, you know, they can bring their children to our system to get educated, which is something new. And I don't know if, I think some people have taken advantage
I
of it.
think we have, a number of people.
So that, you know, as Amy just pointed out, like, so, you know, she's ready to sign documents to hire somebody, but they can't find anything in Conway, which is where they would work and
Right.
where their kids would go to school. So they may have to find Tamworth, Ossipee in that area, but now their child has to go to school down there. So we've changed that policy, which will allow them to come to school in Conway.
All right.
And that's one of those efforts that I was speaking about before, right? The climate and culture and the way we support staff with benefits that don't have a budgetary impact are things we have some control over.
Okay, we'll get into, I'd like to get into other things besides the budget, but since it is a big deal and you started to talk about it, Mike, what about the concept of the best education we can afford? And how does that, how does the school board and the administration kind of take that into account? And as we all know, I'm speaking Bill Marlowe here, but you know, 20 years ago, the school population was 2,100. Now it's about 1,400, but the staff is about the same from 20 years ago. And if the warrant passes, including special articles, at least according to Bill Marvel, it's going to add about $500 to a typical $350,000 house. So I guess the idea is that we all want to have, it's sort of like the argument of how safe can we make, you know, how much money do we spend to keep our kids safe? But is there a limit to how much from the, you know, what's this, you're talking to the average taxpayer here. How do you convince them that they should support this entire budget, which is, and the warrant articles, can they afford it? Ryan, why don't you start?
I would have taken it. Go
Yeah, I
ahead.
know, you're good.
I think for budget purposes, the biggest concern probably, you know, for taxpayers is their tax bill and what they see 50% is the cost. And we saw changes in the reassessment and how that cost burden shifted. I could go on for days for the deep dive that I've done with that. But the concern I would have is if people vote this down due to the increases in the cost shift burden from commercial to residential and making a very dangerous decision for school purposes. So I think as far as, you know,
I guess I'm asking how much do you take that into consideration? Because the reval is not your fault. It's nobody's fault, obviously, but it did shift the tax burden from commercial, but that still affects the taxpayer. And this kind of reminds me of like the Biden-Trump debate before the election, where the Biden people were saying, look, there's all these reasons why we have inflation, and you know, maybe they were right or not, and the Trump people were saying, we don't care, it's just too much, so we're going to vote them out. And my fear, if I could project, is that voters are going to say, yeah, you can, Mike, you can make all the argument you want about, okay, here's the special ed, here's this, is that, but at the end of the day, they're going to say, it's too much. I mean, how do you convince the voter that it's not?
Anybody feeling that way needs to be advocating in Concord. We have a state funding structure issue in New Hampshire. That is the bottom line. When our cost per pupil hovers around the state average, you can't get better than that. And so until state funding structures are shifted and more of the burden is off of property taxes, we can't improve that given the parameters from which we build a budget, with legal obligations and statutory obligations to the number of staff that we need for the children we have. So for taxpayers to say that the children of our community should have a less robust education as a result of a state funding structure issue is unfair, in my opinion.
Can I jump in on that too? First of all, as you know, we kind of dispute some of Bill's numbers,
Okay.
right? But overall, let's just talk about Mount Washington Valley and where we are comparative to the elementary schools. So we're anywhere from $7,000 to $17,000 less than other elementary schools in Mount Washington Valley, all the way out to Freedom, right? That's a significant number that the budget committee doesn't want to recognize. They look at what we're doing as spending way too much money, but yet we're $7,000 to $17,000 less than some of the people just in our general area. Then you look at our high school level, and perhaps we may be a little higher in some areas, but we're competing with, you know, cities like that have thousands of kids going, right? So their cost per student should be considerably lower than ours. So, you know, and then we also get, Bill Marvel likes to, compare us to schools that don't have a career tech center. That's a significant difference that this valley has supported over and over and over again.
Not every school has career tech centers, right?
That
No,
is
that's
correct.
correct.
But we're being compared to those schools when it comes to student-teacher ratios as well as cost per student. Those are the numbers that we see during budget season that get thrown out every single year. And we're like, wait a second, we have a phenomenal career tech center, and the people in this valley have supported that financially. That's part of our budget, right? And so if you wanted to say, let's drop down in our budget, several $1 million, take all those students that are spending their time in career tech, move them back over to the regular academic world, then we would probably be more in line with some of the bigger schools financially, but we're providing a phenomenal service that the Valley has chosen. I do want to speak one more thing about budgets. And people also have to keep in mind that, Amy inherited a budget that she had nothing to do with, right? Because as you know, the conversation for budgets starts 24 months
Right.
before we expend the last dollar. So she's inherited something that no control over, and yet she's already putting things in place that will work on that report card. So in my mind, when you ask me, how do I try to convince a voter to support our budget? What I'm asking them to do is to support that because we have a vision to change the report card. I've said it already, right? It's a national problem. It's, there's no question statistically across the country, grades are coming down. And I think, Amy, along with Krista Brachet, are really starting to get laser focused. I spent an hour, I don't know if Krista told you the other night, I spent an hour and a half with her the other night looking over the data that she's putting together that hopefully they'll put into play. But again, inheriting a budget that they had nothing to do with to make that happen. So it's very complicated.
It is. It's complicated. I'm going to be the average voter again and say if we had the same, if we have 700 fewer students than we did 20 years ago, but the number of employees is the same, is that because you'd kind of hinted at economy of a scale? With a big school, you have economy of scale. So if we're trying to offer more programming in career tech, obviously the pool is spread out, therefore you probably have smaller classes, and to be able to offer the same number of class choices, you're going to have more people. But I guess my question is how can we have the same number of people as we did when we have so fewer children as we did 20 years ago? What are they doing?
The children 20 years ago are not the same as the children now. Our kids face vastly different issues than they did 20 years ago. And so to provide them a safe and robust environment and education requires staff. It just does. And we always hear this, the numbers of staff haven't changed, the numbers of staff haven't changed. And while on paper, depending on how Bill's calculating total number of staff, which I imagine is including custodians, maintenance, and all of that, but either way, when talking about the total number of staff, we have made significant reductions in teaching staff over the years. Just in this budget alone, the budget being proposed, there's a reduction of 4 teachers, right? We've made significant reductions, but student needs are vastly different.
Ryan, and I know you're all in the schools, and Ryan, you spent a lot of time in the schools. And one of the things that I say when I've had these debates with other people about the budgets and the school performance and things is that we just seem to have, and this is, I have no idea except my own opinion, is that we just have a higher level, a higher percentage of disadvantaged kids going into the school system than we did even 20 years ago. Ryan, what do you?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up.
In what way are they disadvantaged?
So when I've been a police officer for almost 18 years now, and what I was responding to for calls, domestic calls and home situations 18 years ago is drastically different than what kids are facing now. About 6 years or so, we really dealt with a significant fentanyl and heroin epidemic. Lots of kids were being born drug addicted, and then immediately became raised by grandparents. So you have a generational gap of who are now raising these children. We go to calls regularly where we have students that are living in motel rooms, students are homeless, and due to the housing situation, not able to, they're bouncing around to different couches. Relatives here and there, and makes it very difficult to bring stability to the home. So now our teachers and our staff are being forced to be the one stable piece of their life. And that's more than just reading and arithmetic and math. They're now being guidance counselors, providers of food, clothing, sometimes hygiene, lots of issues there. We regularly deal with domestic situations where kids are still being exposed to horrific drug situations, seeing violence, things of that nature. And then we're expecting them to just go into school the next day and function when they just dealt with this chaos situation at home. I think that's an unrealistic expectation for kids.
I mean, what's the obligation? Obviously, a kid can't learn unless he or she has a full stomach and has a safe environment at home. But what's the obligation of the school system to provide basically social services?
Unless someone else is going to do it, it is our obligation. Like we have to educate the children, and as you said, they can't learn unless their basic needs are being met, and therefore if no one else is meeting those basic needs, that falls on our teachers. The role of the teacher has changed significantly.
So a lot of those positions now, I mean, if we have the same number we did 20 years ago, are they many of those aides and special ed people and all that?
Special education has definitely increased. Our students are coming to us with high levels of specialized need. So some of those support positions are critical to their success or to their access to the regular education setting. Additionally, we have school social workers and family support liaisons that are critical to the success of our families. We have a high transiency rate, and that drastically impacts a child's performance in school. If they come to us, they take our state test, that score counts on our report card, and yet they may have been in 4 schools prior to coming to us. This very same month, they take that assessment.
What is the transient I mean, do you have any numbers? I mean, I think someone said that like a third, every school year, like a third of the kids actually change schools.
In some places, it's more than that. What we've found in Conway is that school consolidation has actually helped improve that number, because we now have the 1 K2 school and the 3-5 school.
You can't move.
So even if the family moves,
right,
the child remains stable in that same building. Whereas before, if a child moved to North Conway, for example, and a family couldn't provide transportation, that child would have to switch schools. Now, even within that scenario, at least they're within our district. Right? We have so many students that are moving in and out of our district and in and out of our schools every week. And the continuity in their academic programming is a major concern. And so that requires staff to scoop up a new student, not only make them feel comfortable, right, that they have a sense of belonging within our schools, but also that they're up to speed academically, even though the program or curriculum used or whatever the circumstances may be could be significantly different.
It's a little hard, we're all, long time residents of Conway area anyway, and it's just hard to get, for us, it's hard to get, or for me, it's hard to get my head around this idea of transient population coming and going. So it's not only within the schools that you describe, but people are coming and going in and out of town.
That's correct.
I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Amy, but didn't you do an analysis in Bartlett that only like 20% of the kids that start in kindergarten or first grade move on to the sixth grade at Bartlett or something?
Yeah, so each year we track how many students enroll in our schools as kindergartners and stay through the duration. And a couple of years ago, Bartlett had the largest transiency rate with I think you're right, 25% or something, having only been there since kindergarten. The rest had come and gone. Some started, left, and came back. Others moved in, some moved out. But that's happening all over our schools.
The can one of you explain the special ed, how special education works in terms of outplacement? I mean, we know that, I mean, obviously it's expensive, whatever district, but like a small town like Bartlett, like three kids need outplacement, all of a sudden their budget goes up $600,000. Mm-hmm. So that's a federally mandate, unfunded federal mandate, right, to provide whatever that term is for an education for a special ed student. So how does it work when a student is outsourced to another? How does that work? Is it an unlimited number of funds, or who chooses where that student goes, I guess?
Sure, I can answer that question. So,
Thank you.
We're definitely giving that one to her.
Yeah.
So we do everything in our power to equip our teachers and our schools with the supports they need to keep students in district. With that said, those special education services that students require as part of a very extensive evaluation process and an individualized educational plan, all of those services dictated by that plan fall on the resident district. That happens no matter what. When a student's needs rise beyond the level of what we're able to accommodate for within a public school setting, occasionally they require an out-of-district placement. There are several placements throughout the state or throughout New England that are looked at to see what might be a good fit based on the student's needs. The state at times, or in many instances, dictates the cost of that placement because it has to be a state-approved out-of-district placement.
Are these school, when you say a placement, is that a school?
Correct. Some residential, some day programs. It really depends on the program and what the student is requiring. But we have no control over the cost of those programs. And so it could vary, $100,000 to $350,000 in any given year for one student. And so when Mike alluded to trying to plan ahead for a budget, right, 18 months or so in advance, we plan for the students we have right now, specifically in regards to their special education services and what we are anticipating them needing. But at any given time, that can change significantly, either one way or another, right? It can increase significantly if a child then requires an out-of-district placement that we weren't aware of, or if a child moves in and we weren't expecting them, or if a child is doing really well because all of our interventions are working and they no longer require a one-to-one paraprofessional, for example, then it decreases our budget. But the variability of special education in any school district is just huge.
Some of these residential programs, because it's hard to imagine how that $300,000 could be spent on one person or anybody, never mind a special ed. How can it be so expensive?
It's tuition, it's services, transportation sometimes.
Are they residential too?
Sometimes, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And sometimes we're not even notified by the state when the rate changes ahead of time in order to be able to predict. And that happens.
In this current budget we're in right now, we're closely watching that line item because we found out after the budget was put together, because we have to put that budget together so far in advance, that the rates have dramatically gone up in some of our special ed lines, and because of out of district stuff. So.
And that's, might I just add, that's precisely why every year voters will see on the warrant an article for special education trust funds, and that is to provide a fund to alleviate these highs and lows that are unpredictable, that allow us to tap into that reserve accounts when those situations arise. So again, if we're talking about what voters should be supporting, that's a big one.
Can I just comment one thing real quick too? Because Conway is much larger than certainly any of the schools surrounding us, we have a lot of those people on staff, where those special ed students from the smaller schools can dramatically affect their budget even more, because they don't have that staff like we do. So let's just say we could take a couple of kids in that this staff member can handle several clients at a time, kind of thing. Where the smaller elementary schools around us, they would just have to contract it out or send that student somewhere else. So we're lucky enough to be in that area of to have the staff within house for a lot of things that we run into.
Just getting back to the budget for a minute, the last year the voters voted for the default budget, which was $1.3 or $4 million less than the school board budget. This year the difference is less. It's only, I think, 600,000, and I think you addressed it at the deliberative, or somebody did. Amy, I think you did. So what happens what cuts will there be if the default is approved by the voters next week?
So as administrators, this is a task we tackle every year, right, in anticipation or in preparation for that being a possibility. We've identified several areas that would have to be reduced. Career tech programming, looking at eliminating a program at the Career Tech Center, eliminating additional classroom teachers, which increases class size, eliminating some maintenance items that are critically necessary to keeping our buildings functioning well, some professional development that we've really tried to make a priority for our staff that directly impacts our students. So there are a variety of areas that we have to look to reduce should the default budget go into effect.
Ryan, Mike, you want to weigh in on that? Are there any areas that seem obvious that would be trimmed?
I think the staffing was going to be,
It has to be staffing.
Yeah.
Yep.
So keep in mind though too, when people talk about staffing, the way the system works is you're not removing the teacher that's been here for 30 years making the highest salary in the district. You're removing that new person that
Less expensive.
Less expensive,
Right.
which in order to get to the number of 650,000, you need a bunch of those new, less expensive teachers rather than 1, 2, or 3. Well, 600,000, you still need a bunch, but so it's not like you're just removing 2 or 3 people. I think we're looking at least 12 or so, probably to get to that 600,000. So it's a lot of people that we would be removing, which directly affects education, and in a time when we're trying to turn things around.
All right, just trying to find my notes here about the special articles, and one of them is about the contract, and why is it that, let's see, excuse me for looking through this. It's Article 5, and this is the Conway Education Support Personnel. And the first year is 413,000, then it's 122 and 144. Why is it front-loaded for this year?
Because you're trying to make that adjustment to get into same thing as last year with the AFSCME contract.
Yeah.
So there's a significant amount to try to bring people up into the what's the word I'm looking for? Competitive
base
range.
salary. Right.
And then from there you stabilize and go with kind of cost of living increases after that. So.
All right. And probably the most controversial special article is about the study to consider moving the main entrance to the back.
Yep.
And to the front of the back, basically. And Lloyd has been interviewing the school board candidates, and basically they've all said that they I don't want to put words in their mouths, but they would looked at it with a little more skepticism whether that's a good idea. A couple of them he'd said, hey, why don't we just, there's a lot of ideas. I mean, just make a sidewalk, have the kids walk around, hire somebody to let people through the door, and the back door. It seems like in this time, if there's going to be any special article that may get not approved, that's the obvious ones. The justification, right?
Any one of us could
I
go
know
with
that.
that one.
Well, and that gets back to the, how much money you can spend every dollar in the world for child safety, and is there a point where you can't do it?
So I guess I would make the argument that I think everybody in town knows that 20 years ago the design of that building was wrong, right? I mean, it came up 20 years ago. Like, why is the front door where the administration office is in the wrong, not in an area where everybody comes in, right? We all said it, right? I was on the board 20 years ago. We all know it. So how long do we live with that?
Why didn't you change it 20 years ago?
Because I wasn't on the board when a design was done.
Okay.
I got on there after all that design was done, and I fought tooth and nail to change it, but it was too late. So 20 years now, the bonds are gone. The idea is let's make the building more efficient the way it should be. In part of that conversation is also the safety and security of the building itself. The building was never built and designed based on what's happening in this world today. We all know that. So part of the project is to move administration to a more a better layout within the building, and then a portion of that probably would be to harden that building up a little bit, not a little bit, the way it should be for today's standards. So there's two parts of that whole warrant article. At $215,000, is that what it is? 215 or 230, something like that. I think that's a little high, but that was what we hired, Gale Associates to come in and say, if this total redesign was done, what would that cost us? So that number includes the entire redesign of every wire, every pipe, every system, as well as the bid contracts to go out. So it's a complete package of work that we can hand to somebody in the bidding.
What's the estimated cost of after the contract to do all that work? It's got to be millions.
I think that varies depending upon how high security we want. So I'm on the high end because I want to make the building as secure as possible. And that doesn't mean people can't come in. That just means we know who's in the building and we keep the people out we don't want to have in there. But then that's going to be a decision for the school board later on after this warrant article has passed, is do they want it at my level of security, or do they want it at, let's say, Bill Marvel's level of security, which I'm not even sure he has a door included in his.
He's got keys.
I mean, Bill Marvel doesn't believe that should be any cameras in the building. He doesn't believe that. Just essentially, he said they basically leave the building open.
Ryan, you're a police officer, and we're in the schools a lot. I mean, how do you balance between having security provided by a person standing at the door versus cameras and locks? And why can't we just lock the door? I mean, I guess
The doors are locked.
The doors are locked.
The door's locked. I appreciate that. So what am I missing here is that keep the doors locked and have someone either monitor the doors, or you come in only certain times a day. I guess I'm missing a big piece of what's so hard about keeping people out.
The Homeland Security report, and I referenced this at the deliberative, talked about controlling entrances. And that's a big thing anywhere you go. I mean, an airport, you have one way to get onto the terminal. Right now we have 4 entrances that students use in the school. And if there's ever going to be an issue, it's going to be somebody who knows the school, a student or family member or something like that. And they have 4 different ways to access it. So by reducing that down to, we could potentially reduce this down to 2 entrances by going this route, the main entrance in the rear and the career and tech entrance that students would regularly access. The other part of that question?
Well, no, just saying is, okay, that all makes sense. You lock all the doors, and you have one main entrance in the back.
Yeah.
And what's so difficult about not just keeping that door locked until you want students and faculty to come in, or have it manned by a security person full-time, which would be a whole lot cheaper than spending millions of dollars
then-
rearranging
And
it.
then we'd have the question for Bill, just a attack of another, we're just hiring another person to.
Well, that's Bill's issue,
Yeah.
but I mean, yeah.
If you, I mean, we could talk about security all day long,
Right.
and that is the primary issue around this proposed article. However, if you just think about like simple layout of the building,
Right.
all of our students and our staff enter primarily through that back entrance. So for all of the administration to be located at the front of the building, when a large majority, if not all, of the flow in and out of the school happens at an alternate location currently, it just simply doesn't make sense. So this is not only to increase security, but it's to ensure that parents who come to meet with building principal or school counselors or whomever it might be all enter through one entrance. Parking is in close proximity, that we're not having students park at the back where they're currently parking and then walking all the way around to the front to get checked in to the building. Because again, our doors are locked and they are secure and there is a way for visitors to sign in, but we know what parking is like at the front of that building as it's currently laid out. The majority of the parking is in the back. Just take all of the other things outside of the equation, the layout just simply doesn't make sense. And so we do man the doors. They are locked. But when you've got 600 kids coming in and out throughout the day, and parents and staff, to not have a bulk of the administration or folks who are monitoring the doors down at that location, it just doesn't make sense.
And how, I mean, when you walk in the back door, I mean, you take a right, you get to the auditorium, and then you get the gym.
Right.
Like, you're not going to move those
No.
pieces, so
No.
does that just
Precisely why that should be the entrance, right? Because that's where people are going. When they
Right.
come to an event, that's where they're going.
But those administrative offices that are now in front, when you get ringed in, they're going to be,
In the marketing area.
Right in that area near the gym and the auditorium.
Yeah.
That's the proposal. Move them from the front of the building, replace those administrative offices that are currently at the front with other programs and
Right.
people, and move them to that main entrance by the gym, by the auditorium, where everyone's entering and exiting currently.
so that makes sense, but why is it so complicated that, so what are the other security features? I mean, that makes sense from a practical point of view, people going in the back, not the front. So that's that, which has nothing to do with security in one sense. So what's the big piece of the security, other than moving everybody to the back and locking all the doors, what's the other big piece of security that's going to be expensive?
I honestly, I think there's two conversations. It's the functionality, as
Right.
has been pointed
Yep.
out, and I believe I'm more the person who brought the security question in, because that really wasn't proposed at all. When it first came to the board, it was really about the functionality of the building, and my feeling is we shouldn't be doing anything without increasing security. So that's why that conversation came together
Right.
with.
So there's a little bit of a tail wagging the dog, a little bit.
A little bit, yeah.
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 Ryan, you have any thoughts on the security in general? I mean, how good is it now?
Well, I think it's great that we have a police officer there full-time. That's obviously I've been in that role, and we've definitely stopped a lot of incidents by having an officer there. The comfort of our students to go and report things to a police officer is a big thing. There have been dangerous situations stopped by having an officer there. Just in the fall, out on the football field or the athletic fields, by having a police officer there. I think overall the school is definitely very safe. There are definitely vulnerabilities with every school, but I definitely feel good about the current
Sure.
situation there.
Okay. On the contract that's coming up for the sending towns, we've all heard that a number of them are looking for alternatives. I mean, Bartlett is talking about it, Jackson, Tamworth, sending kids to Moultonborough, I guess. What is it that you're doing to keep them, basically? How do you, there's the reason they're looking at alternatives. So how are you going to address their concerns of why they're leaving or could be leaving?
So every town has unique needs, and some of the families in Jackson and Bartlett are already sending their kids to private pay. The parents sending their kids to academy. So if they can enter into agreements and hopefully try and negotiate so their town can offset their costs. And I mean, that's their own thought process. One town said it, pretty well, that some school situation just doesn't work for every kid. And I think that's primarily, a Tamworth situation where the option that they have with Molten Borough Academy offers that, their term, relief valve for, if situations just aren't working at, Kennett High School, we now have an alternative option. I think all of these towns do believe that majority of their kids are going to continue to go to Kennett High School, and that's certainly our hope. But we're not going to also just, be a open door, come in one and go. We want some stability there. We want to have agreements going forward, and we want to make sure we built this school for all these towns, and we don't want to be the only one at the table. Now when
Sure.
the used car is there.
Amy?
And I also think that naturally, after a 20-year contract expires, of course you would look at options, right? It doesn't necessarily mean you're unhappy or displeased with the current situation, but it would be doing your town a disservice to not just see what else is out there and gather information. I think what we're hearing consistently in every town is Kennett High School, specifically the Career Tech Center, provides opportunities for our students in the Mount Washington Valley that no school anywhere near us is able to provide. And because we have the Career Tech Center built directly into our high school, it is available to all students. Whereas in other neighboring schools, Freiburg Academy, for example, students have to bus to Lakes Region or wherever they might go for career tech opportunities that are nowhere near as robust as what we can offer at Kennett High School. So I think when people are saying everybody's looking for other options, they're looking for other options because they're doing their due diligence to determine what's best for their community and what's best for their students. However, we believe that most will stay with us because of what we have to offer at Kennett High School.
Can I jump in
Sure,
on that
sure.
too? So it's interesting when they talk about school choice. So most of the conversation when people hear that, they're talking about the high school because they're talking about Freiburg Academy or Molten Borough Academy,
Because they have their own primary schools.
and they
Yeah.
and they use that word school choice, like I
Right.
believe in school choice.
Right.
But do they really? Because school choice, if they truly believed in it, would be, well, the elementary kids should be able to come to Conway if they want, right? So, for example, a lot of parents live and work, or not live, but work in Conway. So their school choice may be that they want to come to Conway, which actually would cost some of these other sending towns money because that student would be leaving their building and coming to ours. So it's interesting when everybody
Right.
uses that word school choice. It's not. I don't think they totally believe it at a lower level. But in the reality, we've run the numbers. The sending towns could save a fortune if they all tuitioned their elementary schools and middle schools up to Conway. I mean, I think
You mean just not have their own elementary
if they,
schools?
listen, nobody wants to shut down.
Right.
It took us 20 years to shut down one building.
You're not going to convince Bartlett?
We're not going to convince Bartlett, so I'm only saying this in
Yeah.
the conversation. I'm not saying
Yeah.
Bartlett should do, or
Yeah.
any other town should
Right.
do it. But the reality is just if we took all the middle school in 6th through 7th and 8th, I think it was Bartlett, didn't we run the numbers? It was like $1 million that they would save, or we would get in some revenue. It's a significant number. Same with, if you throw Madison, cost per student. If they shut down their elementary school, that's a $3.5 million savings for them, and it's certainly great revenue for us, right? So, that word school choice
Right.
is interesting how they use that, because it still comes down to those hometown schools, and people aren't quite ready to say, I'm going to shut down my elementary school over here so I can save $3 million and go up here.
Sure.
You know
yeah.
what I mean?
Well, it's everybody likes their local school, and we'll put
Of course we do.
we'll flash your phone number up on the screen so people can talk to you about it.
no, people can talk to
No,
me
no,
about it
just
because I've been, I've been an advocate for K through 8.
Yeah.
Right? That building wouldn't get built unless we became a regional
Right.
building, a regional school system, and those other towns came. That's really where the savings would come from. That's where the academic would certainly change for all of these towns, because it would all be under one building, And
That's been your, I mean, you've floated that before about
Right.
basically creating a new
it
building.
doesn't go anywhere.
Well, you got to get
gotta
time.
run the headline.
I mean, what do you think, Amy, about that? I mean, this is obviously down the road, but one new building.
I mean, I think we're one community, right? And so, you know, we have different perspectives a little bit on the, you know, everybody coming to Conway. I obviously represent all of the towns, and you know, I
good
don't
point.
I don't want Jackson I don't want Jackson Grammar, you know.
We'll flash your
we-
phone number here, too.
No, we have community schools, right? And we believe in our community schools. There is no doubt about that, or at least I do. Each of our schools in SAU 9 are uniquely different from one another, and they all have a strong sense of community. And so while we don't want any of those schools to close, we want to look ahead in the future. And like Mike said, the high school was built with everybody on board, right? And so now we're kind of facing this challenge of, are you still in, or you know, are you going to go elsewhere? And I think that it's important that we
My
that
battery's about to die.
we
Yeah,
continue
okay.
to focus on being one united community and being able to support each other, because in the end, that is the Mount Washington Valley. And in the future, it might mean, you know, SAU 13 sixth graders coming with Conway sixth graders to Kennett Middle School. I don't know.
Is there a chance to change it to, a whole structure to change it to a cooperative? I mean, because I think the high schools, you know, the towns say we don't have any say with the high school, basically. Is there any chance with these, with the contract, that you could just change the whole structure to a cooperative, which means that everybody would basically vote for one big school board?
We've had some like very juvenile or introductory conversations in these tuition contracts. Just we've been saying like this probably makes sense, you know, as we
Wait a
dive into these
minute, I
numbers.
mean, juvenile like it's stupid?
No,
juvenile?
sorry, maybe that's a wrong word, but just
Beginning,
like
yeah.
Preliminary
infant, yeah.
conversations,
preliminary.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think most of us believe in it.
In what?
In a regional type environment, cooperative, or you know, similar to what Kingswood does, right? The problem is that the ownership of the buildings. You know, I think it was 50, 60 years ago, whenever Kingswood Regional was created, and I don't even know when, maybe it was more than that, they took ownership of all the buildings. And that's
The cooperative.
The cooperative did. So it, you know, Conway right now owns, what, 5 buildings, right? If we became a cooperative or regional, then that entire, like Bartlett would have just as much ownership into all of our buildings as we would have ownership into their buildings. And I don't think anybody's ready for that. I believe in it. I wish it could happen, but I don't know if at a local level people would ever buy into that, you know, which is interesting because Kingswood did it so long ago and it's worked very successful for them. So,
Does Kingwood have the same number of, as many sending towns?
well, they go all the way out to Effingham, Effingham,
Ossipee,
Ossipee.
Tufton Borough.
They have 7 or 8 altogether, and then there's one town that tuitions in. I think that's New Durham. I think New Durham tuitions in, but other than that, they're all part of the regional. So that's 7 or 8 of them.
And if you think about just trying to create consistency for our students, right? We have seven sending towns, then we have SAU 13 with 3.
Right.
So that's that many different school boards, that's that many different policies, right? So there's benefits beyond just everybody being one united community with a more cooperative structure, regional structure, in terms of there just being consistency and continuity. What we do when Conway revises a policy, for example, then we go to Jackson and we go to Bartlett and we're doing it all over again, right? So bringing everybody together and really addressing the issue of everyone's voice should be heard, I think is important. If truly we believe in being one united Mount Washington Valley.
And who is negotiating? Is it the SAU board that's negotiating with the sending towns? Or is
No,
it
no.
Conway.
Conway.
Okay, so you are.
So me, Ryan's the chair. I don't even think we have a vice chair, but it's Ryan, myself, and Randy Davidson are negotiating with the sending towns.
Are there going to be any tweaking to the formula because it's based on valuation plus census?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah,
There
yeah.
will be?
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
And how, I mean, in general, because I know it gets into weeds quickly, but in general, why does it need to be tweaked?
So I think the initial funding formula was consistent with the costs associated with building the school at that time. So now that the schools are built, it's paid for, the stuff at the middle school has been paid for, now it can be changed.
That means less based on valuation or more based on property valuation?
Well, so we can't get into specifics about the tuition negotiations just because they're still non-public.
Yeah.
But what we can speak to, one of the goals being that sending towns their contribution or what they're paying in for tuition more closely aligns with the number of students that they send. And so, you know, in some of these towns where equalized valuation was quite high, right, they're paying more, a higher percentage when they're sending less kids. And so our goal in looking at those tuition formulas and how those might be tweaked was really to bring that into more alignment and to create less of a swing between towns, right? So it's seemingly unfair that one town pays a significantly higher tuition rate because of equalized valuation, for example, as opposed to another town. So both bringing those things into alignment was a goal of negotiations and will continue to be moving forward.
All right, so we only have like 3 minutes left, and I have to ask about the name changes at the school.
Oh, jeez.
I knew that.
We could have done a whole hour on that. But so, Amy, you made the case that, and Mike, you were actually wanted to keep the names, right?
I do.
Okay,
Yep.
all right.
So she can do her half. I'll do my half.
All right,
Even though she's an alumni too, so right.
All right, so what do you think? Now we are, and I know, Amy, you're going to say, well, it's expensive to change it all back, and you said that the deliberative, but what do you think?
I was the only board member that voted not to change the names.
Now that it is,
I would,
how are you
I
going to
haven't-
vote?
if depending upon how the warrant article comes out, the petition warrant article, I would vote to go with the majority of that petition warrant article.
It's diplomatic.
Well, I'm not gonna. I'll put it to you this way: I'm not making a big deal of any changes, but I would vote to change it back. I've been very honest about that right from day one. I disagreed with changing. I know that others have an entirely different point of view, but I can tell you I'm not going to debate for weeks and months about it. It's one vote, no debate on my part, and that's.
It's not just a referendum, right? I mean, if the vote passes, you have to change. Is that-
No.
No, it's a
Okay.
it's
It's
advisory
non-binding.
only.
It's non-binding. You're right. I'm sorry about that.
Non-binding.
So, but you're going to vote personally. You're going to vote against to change it back.
I would vote to change them back.
Okay,
Yeah.
Ryan.
So you mean when I actually stand in the ballot,
yeah.
or okay? I'll tell you, I'll vote to leave them as they are.
Okay, and Amy, I know you're, and maybe you could repeat it quickly of why it's such a big deal to change it back.
We can make anything happen.
Right.
The point of the matter is we made a significant change when we closed the school. We changed the structure and the history of how we do education in the Mount Washington Valley. So I struggle with even just the names representing history when we changed history already. And the children impacted don't have a voice at the table. And that's unfair. We've all adjusted. We took this change, we made it happen swiftly. We helped to assist the kids in that transition. They did a remarkable job, going along with our plans. And to add further disruption at this point, to me, seems unnecessary to preserve history. We changed it already. There's nobody you're going to talk to, I don't think, that has a stronger tie to this community and these schools than I do. I went to Pine Tree School as a student. I went to John Fuller as a student.
I went to all of
Pine
them.
Tree was built. I moved schools, went to Pine Tree, became the principal of Pine Tree, only the second principal ever in that building, with some of my teachers that had been teachers of mine. Went to Kennett Junior High, went to Kennett High School, and came back here. So I believe in the history of all of our buildings. I don't believe that's been erased. We preserve that every day in what we do as educators and what we do with our students and what we do as just community members of Mount Washington Valley.
I mean, it's well said, but I think what people wonder is like, why didn't the school board listen or just pay more attention or give more credibility to the hundreds of people who signed that petition and all that when you were making the change?
Well, the change was made before people came out of the woodwork to oppose the change. So that part, we had a public hearing. I think there were two people
Well,
that
we
showed
had,
up.
and we had public forums too, community forums where we got people's input. And one of the priorities of this entire transition was to rebrand the schools to make our students feel like they have a sense of belonging. And a significant part of that came with changing the names. Whether you like the names or not, that was part of the plan from the onset. So the public hearing was well after those conversations had been communicated and had amongst the community.
I still call it the old high school. And if you hear me say Pine Tree or
Conway
L, you can substitute Mountain Intermediate
Yeah.
or
Lakeside
Lakeside Primary, because
All right.
I say it all the time. I catch myself in meetings saying it all
You're
the
getting
time.
better. You're getting
I am
better.
getting a little better, but
Okay, I think we have to leave it at that. Our time is up. Amy, thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Ryan and
Thank you.
Mike.
thank you.
And good luck.
Thank
And
you.
vote for our budget.
Okay.
Maybe we should-